In this video, I'm going to be talking about how you approach texturing important assets in your animations, especially characters. Now, the crucial thing about these assets is you're going to need to have enough texture resolution for your camera to get as close as it needs to. And for this, you're going to actually need to use very, very large textures. Now, I've got this head and it's been UV mapped conventionally. And you can see that I've tried to optimize the face part so that that's where most of the texture resolution is. But this means that there's a lot of distortion on the back of the head. Now you might think this isn't particularly important. Well, it just so happens that shots of the back of a character's head are actually incredibly common. Whenever two characters are talking to each other or there's any interaction with a character and something in front of him, you quite often find the camera goes behind the character, and in these cases you actually need the textures on the back of the head to be able to hold up. And the other problem with conventional UV mapping is that if you zoom in for extreme close-ups, you're just never going to have enough resolution, simply because even with an 8K map, you're zoomed in so close onto a tiny portion of the UV mapping area that if you have a full HD render at 1920 by 1080, there just won't be enough resolution in the map for it to hold up for a close-up. And the solution to this problem is to use UV tiles, otherwise known as Udims, instead of conventional UV mapping, in order to get more resolution. I'll show you how this works. If I zoom out of my UV map area, and I'm going to change to a different map that's using Udims, and you can see that rather than use the tiny area in the single UV tile defined by conventional UV mapping, I've now extended this outwards and I've broken up my mesh so that different parts of it are displayed in different tiles, and I've got 4 tiles going in each direction, 4 in the U and 4 in the V, which means that overall I've got 16 times more surface area for my UV mapping. And each one of these UV tiles can hold a separate image map. So that means that instead of having one image map covering the entire head, I can now have 16 8K maps on this one asset, which would give me an enormous amount of resolution. So if I now go to my shader tree and select this UV checker texture and change its mapping to go from the standard UV map to the UDIM map, you'll see the difference straight away. If I switch between the two, you can see just how much more information I can hold with the UDIMs, and I can zoom in much, much closer. And the other big benefit I get from using Udims is that I've got a lot more freedom when it comes to unwrapping my mesh, because I can break it up into smaller pieces, which means that ultimately I'm going to get far less distortion across the mesh because I can unwrap and relax different parts of the mesh according to their particular topology. And this is what the asset looks like once it's been textured using the 16 Udim tiles. Now, in order to create textures on a Udimmed asset, you need a 3D paint program that can deal with Udims. You can't rely on Photoshop for this because Photoshop simply wouldn't know how to deal with the seams. So you need something like Mari, which is probably the best solution for this kind of work. So when it comes to deciding exactly how many parts you should split your models up into, it just depends how important they are to the story and how likely it is they are going to get very close to the camera. So obviously the head was the most important asset of this particular character, so that's why I've split that into 16 UV tiles. But as for other parts of his body, I've used far fewer. I think the torso is divided into 8, and each section of these limbs is divided into 4. And to put this to the test, I've actually created an extreme close-up of the character's eye, and this is exactly the kind of shot you can imagine a director requesting for a dramatic moment in the story, and you need your assets to be able to hold up to this kind of extreme close-up. So I've done a render. If we examine it, you can see that the edge of this displacement map is still holding up pretty well, despite the fact that we're in full HD and we're extremely close to the model. So when you're rendering in HD, it's really important to allow yourself to have enough resolution in your texture maps so that your characters can get close to the camera without the textures falling apart. And this is why using Udims is really important in modern animation workflows.